We are gathered at a time when Africa must decide, do we continue to live under the shadow of foreign powers, or do we rise and take our place as a free and sovereign people?
And our last story is from Burkina Faso, where the program to curb malaria, funded by billionaire Bill Gates, has been suspended.
I would urge you to go all out so that we can establish these elite schools, so that these talented individuals do not end up going abroad.
You know, sadly, the virus itself, and it's done a better job of getting out to the world population than we have with vaccines.
Ibrahim Traoré is setting a standard, he's setting an example, and he's setting a pace that puts the rest of Africa to shame.
In a dramatic and highly controversial move, Burkina Faso's military-led government under Captain Ibrahim Traoré has ordered the immediate suspension of a high-profile biotech initiative backed by billionaire philanthropist Bill Gates. The program, known as Target Malaria, has been at the forefront of cutting-edge genetic research aiming to combat malaria, one of Africa's deadliest diseases, through the release of genetically modified GM mosquitoes designed to suppress the population of malaria-carrying females. The government's abrupt decision, announced through a stern communiqué by the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research, includes not only the halting of all target malaria operations in the country, but also the complete destruction of all biological samples associated with the program. All samples will be destroyed according to a strict protocol, said Samuel Paré, a top ministry official, in a statement delivered Friday. This sweeping action is part of a broader campaign by Burkina Faso's ruling junta to reassess and, in some cases, dismantle foreign-funded scientific and humanitarian projects operating within its borders. In recent months, the military government has escalated efforts to limit what it views as foreign interference under the guise of aid or research, particularly when those initiatives are tied to Western governments or institutions. Target Malaria, which has received substantial funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and reportedly also the U.S. military, has faced growing criticism from civil society groups, environmental activists, and Pan-Africanist voices across the region. Critics argue that the release of genetically engineered insects into open ecosystems poses unpredictable ecological risks and raises deep ethical questions about consent, sovereignty, and long-term biological impact. Launched in Burkina Faso in 2019, the project marked the first time GM mosquitoes were released in Africa outside of laboratory-controlled environments. The initial test site was the small rural village of Bana, a remote community of approximately 1,000 residents located in the western part of the country. There, scientists released thousands of sterile, lab-altered male mosquitoes, unable to bite or transmit disease themselves, in a bid to reduce the population of malaria-transmitting females through interrupted reproduction cycles. Over the past 6 years, the initiative expanded its scope, deploying new waves of genetically modified mosquitoes in additional locations across the country. According to internal sources, a fresh release was conducted just days before the government's sudden decree to shut down all operations. While Target Malaria has been celebrated by some in the international scientific community as a groundbreaking approach to disease control, it has not been without controversy, especially in Burkina Faso, where anti-colonial sentiment and suspicion toward Western-led projects have been rising. Some local activists and health advocates accuse the program of using African communities as guinea pigs for untested biotechnology, arguing that proper informed consent and local oversight have been lacking. French Togolese activist Igaunchi Bahanzin, known for his unapologetically anti-Western and pro-Russian rhetoric on social media, weighed in on the development, claiming the program's suspension as a victory. The halting of the project financed by Bill Gates and the U.S. Army is a success, Bahanzin posted on X, formerly Twitter, echoing a growing narrative among Pan-African and decolonial movements that frame such initiatives as covert neo-imperialist interventions under the guise of humanitarian aid. Meanwhile, international observers are closely watching how the shutdown might ripple across the African continent, where other nations have been preparing or considering similar genetically based vector control strategies in partnership with Target Malaria and its parent institutions. The program, which is part of a broader global push to reduce malaria transmission via biotech, is active or in planning stages in several countries, including Uganda and Mali. Despite Target Malaria's assurances that all protocols were followed and communities were engaged throughout the process, tensions have only grown, especially under the current Burkina Faso regime, which has increasingly aligned itself with Russia and severed traditional ties with France and other Western powers. At the heart of the now suspended Target Malaria initiative lies a collaborative scientific effort that spans continents, uniting researchers, bioengineers, and community outreach specialists from Africa, Europe, and North America. The project's ambitious aim has been to harness the power of genetic engineering, particularly gene drive technology, to curb malaria transmission by genetically altering mosquito populations. It is an approach that has sparked both cautious hope in the global scientific community and alarm in environmental and activist circles. The Target Malaria Consortium has deep operational roots in several African countries, including Mali, Uganda, and Burkina Faso, along with parallel ecological monitoring efforts underway in Ghana. In each of these contexts, the initiative has attempted to follow rigorous scientific protocols, national regulatory processes, and community engagement frameworks. However, as the recent backlash in Burkina Faso demonstrates, these measures have not been enough to overcome a growing tide of public mistrust, geopolitical suspicion, and ethical anxiety. The specific technology being deployed, gene drive modification, has been described by some as a potential game changer in the fight against vector-borne diseases. Gene drives are a form of genetic engineering that promote the inheritance of certain traits, such as sterility or sex bias, at higher than normal rates within a population. In this case, the technique is designed to spread traits that reduce the number of malaria-transmitting female mosquitoes, specifically of the Anopheles genus, eventually leading to a collapse in local mosquito populations and a reduction in malaria transmission. However, that very goal, deliberately driving a species toward extinction in a localized area, has triggered serious ethical debates. While the target is a dangerous disease vector responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths each year, many critics argue that tampering with the genetic makeup of a wild species could lead to unpredictable ripple effects in the wider ecosystem. Others worry about what they see as a slippery slope. If the extinction of mosquitoes is justified on public health grounds, what's to stop similar interventions against other species in the future? Burkina Faso activist Ali Tapsoba, a prominent spokesperson for a coalition opposing the project, has been one of the most vocal critics. This technology is deeply controversial and ethically problematic, he warned in a recent public statement. We must prioritize safer, proven alternatives instead of rolling the dice with irreversible interventions. Tapsoba and his coalition, which includes civil society watchdogs and bioethics advocacy groups, argue that the long-term impacts of gene-drive mosquitoes on human health and biodiversity remain unproven and potentially catastrophic. And yet, Target Malaria did not proceed in a legal vacuum. According to documentation from both the organization and Burkina Faso's government agencies, the project underwent multiple layers of regulatory approval. The National Biosafety Agency, ANB, the National Environmental Assessment Agency, ANEVE, and the Health Research Ethics Committee, CERS, each reviewed and signed off on different phases of the project. Target Malaria's operations in Burkina Faso have been based at the Institute of Health Sciences Research, IRSS, a respected national research body. A statement posted on Target Malaria's official social media platforms detailed the process. In July 2025, the team received formal authorization from both ANB and ANEVE to move forward with controlled releases of a specific category of genetically modified mosquitoes, non-gene drive male bias. Mosquitoes, which are engineered to skew offspring ratios toward non-biting males, but do not have the self-propagating qualities of gene drive organisms. Then, on August 11, 2025, a small-scale release was conducted in accordance with the approved biosafety protocols. The organization emphasized that this release followed strict national guidelines and was conducted with the consent of local communities and authorities. Field sites, such as Surukudingan in the Hoet province, had reportedly approved the project through extensive engagement and outreach campaigns. Still, that wasn't enough to quell growing unease. The Coalition for Monitoring Biotechnological Activities in Burkina Faso, CVAB, a watchdog network of civil society organizations, denounced the releases as secretive, risky, and heavily influenced by foreign interests. Their opposition has become increasingly vocal in the weeks following the suspension, pointing to the source of the mosquito modifications as a key point of contention. The genetically altered strains were developed in European labs, particularly in the UK and Italy, and then imported to Africa for live testing, a dynamic that opponents argue reflects a lingering legacy of scientific neo-colonialism, where Western institutions test unproven technologies on African soil with disproportionately low levels of risk to themselves. This is the core of the problem, Tapsoba said in an interview. The proposed solution involves wiping out an entire vector species through gene-drive technology. That's not just about malaria control. It's about exerting power over an entire ecosystem. We're being told this is for our benefit, but we were not the ones who designed or funded this technology. The risks are ours, but the control lies elsewhere. Supporters of the initiative, including Target Malaria researchers themselves, continue to argue that the project was implemented in line with Burkina Faso's legal and scientific standards. They point out that the IRSS team has been conducting malaria-related genetic research since at least 2012, and that the project has undergone years of public consultations, field trials, and transparent dialogue with regulators and local communities. In a recent public response, Target Malaria reaffirmed its commitment to working within the country's legal framework. Our operations have always adhered to national laws and biosafety protocols. We have engaged extensively with Burkina Faso's authorities and communities and are committed to continuing that dialogue in good faith. But in the current political climate, shaped by a powerful wave of nationalism, anti-Western sentiment, and skepticism toward foreign NGOs, such reassurances may no longer be sufficient. The suspension of the program is more than just a scientific setback. It marks a decisive moment in the evolving relationship between African states and international research agendas. It raises urgent questions. Who gets to control the future of public health on the continent? Who bears the risks of technological innovation? And at what cost should scientific progress come? The suspension of the Target Malaria project by Burkina Faso's transitional government is not just a scientific pause. It's a bold political statement. At its core, the move reflects widening fractures between the country's military-led leadership and a web of Western-backed NGOs, many of which are involved in health, development, and environmental sectors across Africa. Since seizing power in a 2022 coup, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has reshaped Burkina Faso's foreign policy trajectory, increasingly steering the country away from traditional Western allies and institutions. In this recalibrated political landscape, projects linked to high-profile Western philanthropists, particularly Bill Gates, are viewed with deep skepticism. The Gates Foundation, long a global leader in malaria eradication funding, has become a symbolic stand-in for what some in the Traoré administration see as Western overreach disguised as humanitarian science. Government officials now insist that Burkina Faso must develop its own homegrown solutions, tailored to local realities, rather than adopt experimental biotechnologies imported from foreign laboratories. In their view, gene-drive mosquitoes represent not just a public health tool, but a techno-scientific intrusion, one that diminishes national sovereignty and places African communities at the forefront of biological experimentation with global implications. The tone of the suspension was uncompromising. With Friday's announcement, all Target Malaria operations were officially halted, and directives were issued for the destruction of all genetically modified mosquito samples within the country. While the government framed this as a matter of precaution and self-determination for the scientific community behind the project, it came as a blow to over a decade of carefully planned research and regulatory engagement. In response, Target Malaria has expressed disappointment, but stopped short of directly challenging the government's decision. The consortium reiterated its commitment to transparency, regulatory compliance, and community engagement, emphasizing that all of its activities were carried out in accordance with Burkina Faso's own biosafety and ethics laws, as well as international standards. Nonetheless, the implications of the decision reverberate well beyond the country's borders. The halt deals a significant setback to genetic approaches aimed at combating malaria, a disease that continues to claim over 600,000 lives annually, the vast majority of them in sub-Saharan Africa. With Burkina Faso once considered a key testing ground for gene drive technologies, the sudden withdrawal raises larger questions about whether other African nations will follow suit, or whether they'll continue down the path of radical biotech innovation in pursuit of malaria eradication. But in Burkina Faso, at least for now, the message is clear. Foreign-engineered mosquitoes, no matter how noble the intent, are not welcome. In a region where history is heavy with foreign exploitation and trust in international institutions is fraying, the suspension aligns squarely with a rising populist nationalist narrative, one that positions the Traoré government as a defender of sovereignty, self-reliance, and environmental caution. And so, as the lab-bred mosquitoes are incinerated and the research teams pack up, Bill Gates' vision of a genetically altered war on malaria has been grounded, at least on Burkina Faso soil.